All right, a very good afternoon to everyone and welcome to IoT Asia. In today's topic of conversation, we are exploring strategic partnerships in the IoT ecosystem. And we have here an established panel of speakers. Firstly, not in any order, but according to what I see on screen, we have Keith Tan, Crown Digital, founder and managing director, Zach Wilson, Alpha Tech, founder and managing director, Anu Shah, global leader of digital supply chain, SAP, and Lian Jai Su, principal consultant, ABI Research. So welcome everyone this afternoon, right? So I just wanted to take the opportunity to break up this entire statement just now around strategic partnerships in the IoT ecosystem with three keywords, right? First one is IoT. Secondly, ecosystem, and thirdly, partnerships. Why? Because we know we've got audiences from various parts of the world, and primarily, I would assume, within our time zone, meaning Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, of course, and so on and so forth. And not everybody is at the same level of speed in which adoption is taking place. So Lian Jia, I know you are definitely in the space of research and you definitely know a lot more around how technology has evolved. So I'm going to start off with you asking the question, could you help us to unpack IoT, ecosystem, and partnerships?
Sure. Thank you, Glenn. So I think one of the key things with IoT is that you need to realize the IoT doesn't the term of the IoT actually started way like decades ago, when most of the technology is still focusing around M2M connectivity. So the idea was that in order to connect machine to machine, you'll be able to leverage the data connected from the machine, and then ultimately you'll be able to design machine that has I think one key thing is contextual awareness, being able to understand its environment, and then you can leverage the data coming from the machine or from the devices to make better operational decisions. So from that point onwards, there has been a lot more advancement within the IoT space. There are better connectivities, there are better cybersecurity practices, there are better software and services platform, which then allows different players and end users to get either better insights from their data, and also being able to connect more and more machine to their platforms and optimize their processes further. And it is because of that's where ecosystem becomes very important in the IoT space. Not every single player knows everything. So there are few big players who do or provide those end-to-end type of services, but many others are specialists in their own domain. It could either be chipset, could be on connectivity, could be on platform, could be on services. So that's where the whole ecosystem play makes a lot of sense, and that's also where partnership becomes very critical. So if you're gonna think about IoT being a project, you do need to have different players across the value chain to participate in it, and how you then connect all these different players, making sure that everybody is either talking to one another or sort of being able to address the gaps within certain situations or certain scenarios, and how do you make sure that everyone is on the same level of understanding when it comes to, let's say, service level agreements, quality assurance, quality of service. Those are critical, and that's where sort of the ecosystem and partnership plays a big role in IoT.
No, thanks a lot, Lian Jai, for that quick introduction to what these things mean. I want to switch over to Keith, and by the way, congratulations to Keith. His wife is about to expect. I thought we should share that, a happy note to everyone out there. So congratulations, Keith, again. So the point I wanted you to bring to life is, and I want to steal your quote, no point building robots for the sake of it, need to back it up with a business model that is sustainable. I want to change the word robot to no point building IoT for the sake of it. need to back it up with a business model that is sustainable. Could you speak more to that and bring that whole word IoT to life in your use?
Thank you, Glenn. And Lian Jai, what you said earlier was exactly what I've been through. Back 5 years ago, we were a coffee shop, a cafe operator. And, we faced a lot of challenges with manpower, and we know how to make great coffee. And at that time, my coffee machine had, a very early stage of sort of an IoT, capability. So it has telemetry. You can download the data. But after that, how are you going to extract the data? How are you going to automate with a robot? No one's doing that. So we wanted to solve our problem by automating the entire project. And we created Ella. And back then, I went to the system integrators. They are the ones who are really good in robotics. They could do the robotic piece, but it's a key, when it comes to the POS, the point of sale, the user interface, that is a different area that we won't touch, and we don't have the expertise for that. So exactly what you said, in order to make IoT work, there are so many different areas that has to come together, and partnership is key. And that's where I must say that I got a lot of help from Intel, the Internet of Things group, because they were having coffee in our cafe all the time. Their office is right next to us. I reached out to them, and they did this very interesting partnership ecosystem sort of matchmaking for me. And we kind of because there's different domains and experts in different areas, you got to kind of combine that together. And today, what we've done is through the whole process of ideation to the POC to the end result of Ella being commercialized, it's a combination of so many different ecosystem partners coming together. In fact, the data as well, making sense of it. That's the end game, right? When you have all this data, you need to collect them in a database, and you need to make sense of that. So this is a journey, and we're going through that. And yeah, so definitely.
And in fact, very interesting, you ended off with data and making sense of it. And now I'm going over to Anu. And Anu, your little word of wisdom was sensors is one part of the solution. Hard part is making sense of the data generated. Could you speak more to that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we often hear from customers is SAP, customers or businesses that are in discussions with us, they will tell us that they're looking to do something with IoT. They want to equip a certain piece of equipment, whether that's some assets, or it can be trucks, it can be anything. They want to equip that with sensors, and then they want to run some sort of analytics on that. And that's a great goal, and absolutely, it's achievable, and it is something to strive for, because you might want to give as a business your customer the insights that are coming from the usage of that asset, for instance. But that alone is not enough, because you need to be able to tie that data and use that data to trigger automation across your entire value chain. So you need to be able to import that data, make sense of it through various applications. This is why you need to enrich the data point that's coming in from a sensor with your business context. And that is typically, speaking in slightly SAP terms here, the master data that would be sitting inside your ERP or inside a business application that provides you with the business context. It would tell you that this temperature reading that you're having on a particular asset is actually going to impact a certain customer order. It's and it can impact your business in a particular way, such that you can take proactive action to prevent any unexpected situations. So this is what we mean by data alone is not enough, or technology transformation is not enough by itself. You need to truly think about what is actually my business objective, and how can I really make use of this IoT data in many parts of my value chain, and particularly as our focus is in many parts of my supply chain and manufacturing processes.
Okay, no, thanks, Anush. And I'm going to draw out another piece that you mentioned, and that's around, I want to use the word smart factory, because that's a term that's been circulating around in this whole entire manufacturing space. Would you try to bring to life the example within that context? Because many in Southeast Asia are typically manufacturers, and then with the China-US trade war, you find that Southeast Asia seems to have that luxury of being the beneficiary of more manufacturing being moved to this part of the world. Could you give us a live example from your experience?
Yes, absolutely. So in the context of what you can do with IoT, we see two or several major use case areas, and I'm going to give one or two examples that come to mind immediately. So of course, getting data from your shop floor into the application and then trickling that all or bringing that all the way up, making sense of it to take management decisions is critical. You need to be able to analyze your profitability based on how your manufacturing process might be performing. So that's an example of what makes it very concrete and creates the need for you to make sense of that IoT data, even if you're just going in with the goal to establish a new factory or an intelligent factory. So, and I'll give a concrete customer example. I can't name the customer, but we've just recently had a conversation with a customer who's gotten on board with a whole range of SAP solutions because they understood the need for, if I want to expand my business, if I want to produce more, I need to expand my production facilities by building a new factory. Now I want that to be an intelligent factory. So what I need is not just IoT in order to get that machine data and really make sense of it and keep my production running, but they also want to use that in the context of their business. So they're combining that with SAP S/4HANA and other solutions of SAP to really make sense of it across the enterprise and drive automation in every part of their business. And IoT really helps, that data helps to drive that automation. But another area or example area that we see is how do you automate your Kanban process? The Kanban process is basically being able to replenish materials that you need for your production just in time or just when they're needed as required. And that's another area where IoT has a huge impact. And this is where we see and we drive a lot of conversations and transformations for our customers.
Thank you so much, Anu. Zach, you have the ambiguous task of highlighting some of the failures that you've seen in your history, especially in the industry that you work in. And for everybody's intents and purposes, Zach spends a lot of time, doing, I call it technically complicated constructions in the light of data center constructions, including technically challenging engineering, clean room constructions, and so on and so forth. And of course, for the space that he's in, there are multiple players, multiple subcontractors. And so I thought, I'll leave you with the tough question of highlighting some of what you've seen as, partnerships gone wrong, so to speak.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Glenn. And I'm again honored to be on the panel with my esteemed colleagues here. I think, there's several different things that we struggle with, and I think especially in Southeast Asia, and sometimes even especially in Singapore, there's the appetite, but we're a very small market. So if you are looking for an Asia expansion, Singapore has the rule of law, which is unique to Asia. It has, very sophisticated technical expertise, but it's just such a small market. It's hard to kind of grab the attention of some of the more mature market players in the industry. So what we find is either it's a huge entity that's very mature, but not, kind of immobile and hard to, they're not very nimble, or then they're the smaller, very technically savvy. They have great tech, but they just don't have the resources to really tackle a market speculatively to establish themselves. And Singapore is sort of the proving ground, and then take that as the beachhead and expand to other larger markets. I think another, place where we've just fallen down at times is a lot of the technology is expensive, and it's hard to get customers who, they're excited about IoT. They kind of understand, and they kind of have sort of a gut hunch that it's going to be very helpful, but even they themselves don't have enough data to realize the value that the IoT information can unlock. So I think, if tying it back to a more understood sort of foundational piece of the built environment is you're building your BMS. And everybody says BMS is building management system, but I actually say it's BMMMMMMS. It's like management, modeling, maintaining, manipulating, mastering, maximizing system. And if you use IoT properly, which is basically taking something that used to be an elaborate built-in hardwired system with a very few people that could manage it, like Siemens, Honeywell, Johnson Controls, Asbill. They've kind of got you actually held hostage by their API. You've basically decentralized that and created a system that can feed into gateways. You don't have to have hardwires, so it minimizes your capital expense. So the promise is there, but it's hard to get. And again, particularly in Singapore, I think, and Southeast Asia, we found it's sort of, unless you have a finance or a validation of savings model, it's really hard to get it across the line unless you have, and I like to say, what do we need to have? We need to have you need to have time, you need to have a senior corporate champion, you need to have vision from senior executive, and you need to have vision. What we run into a lot of times is, the CEO gets all excited about, IoT, they task it, we come up with a plan, we present it, and then the traditional FM people who are used to a BMS with 1M, which is building management system, they block us because they don't understand it. They're worried about security. They're worried about job security because this obviously is going to, take away and provide a whole layer that may be above their pay grade or their technical expertise, or it will simply just replace their role. So I think, you have to look at an IoT deployment as an engineering project, at least from our perspective. And we can't say, oh yeah, IoT, bally ho, it's settled and we're going to solve this problem. You really need to look at it the same way that you look at it as an architectural project or an engineering project. We need to understand the highly nuanced environment that we're entering into. And we always used to use the catchphrase, it's Internet of Things. Tell me the thing that is most important to your business, and then we'll find an Internet of Things device to address that issue. Some businesses don't even know what that most important thing is. They want to do lighting control. And I'm like, well, lighting control is a cost side. Why don't we focus on your revenue side? But sometimes that's too complicated for them. It's like, no, I just need to hit my 14,000 KPI. Let's just fix the lights. So, I think it's a strange mixture of reasons why it's exciting. People like it. We want to do it. It has great, it sounds good, but then really getting down to the fact that it's an undertaking and it requires a highly nuanced and detailed approach. And the other thing I would say where we see failures in IoT deployments is that there's not a foundational workforce of technical experts. There's not a broad pool to tap on. So you end up, again, kind of, it ends up being a bit of a black box. So I think having people who are not intimidated by, have the language of, really understand the language, the infrastructure, the typologies, and again, how do I apply the appropriate device to the thing that is most important to my customer? So I think it's a multifaceted, and sorry, a bit of a kangaroo dance for an answer there. But there's a lot of different reasons. Now, when it does work well is when you have a customer who's, has a very clearly defined business case, comes to you with an open mind and is willing to invest in that technology. And, they understand that ROIs in the real world are not 3 years. So a lot of these companies, their core business, margin is maybe 12 to 15%, but they want a 3-year ROI on an IoT device. So you want the IoT device that I install in your business to actually make more money than your core business. So it doesn't make sense. So I think, being realistic about what is the actual, what are we really getting into here? So those are some of the things as a practitioner and someone who's installed, IoT devices in over 2 million square feet, which is nothing probably compared to the SAPs of the world, the drop in the bucket. But the practical, where the rubber hits the road, these are some of the things that we've struggled with. But I still strongly believe in the merit and the absolute, sort of transformative power of IoT if it's undertaken under the appropriate context. With
okay, no, thanks a lot for that, Zach. And I just want to summarize a couple of key things, and I do see a team running across. You did mention at least 2 times about tell me the thing that is important to your business. And you did mention what is the business case you're trying to address, right? But if you hear that echo across all the speakers today, I think that's one thing the audience can take away with is you don't look at the solution first, you look at the problem you're trying to solve first from a business context. I think if there's one key takeaway that comes through very clearly, and therefore, whether partnerships work or don't work, or whether deployments in IoT work or don't work, is all bent on that first objective. I think that's one key takeaway, yeah? The second one goes into the fact that there is that challenge with what the expectations are in terms of the return on investment and the timeline in which that return on investment is going to be recognized. And that can be a maker or breaker of client and vendor, or client and solution provider partnership, because the expectations could be different. And then at the same time as well, there is this understanding of what this whole IoT realm and its ecosystem means to other people, because what happens then is that not everybody knows every single detail, and the fear of that or the lack of that knowledge seems to be something that also is a roadblock. Yeah. So at least these few key things seem to be coming through for what works and what doesn't. And so I just want to make sure that the audience is aware of what has been mentioned, so that it makes it easier for you to take it away as a key takeaway. Yeah. I'm going to open it up to the floor now for a couple of things that people have in the back of their minds, right? And one of it is, with the proliferation of all these data floating around from one machine to another, from one system to another, we've seen news around how a company's cybersecurity is actually being compromised because of one of these IoT devices. And I just wanted the audience to take note of that, and also for the panel speakers to highlight a bit about how that is being risk mitigated, if you may. Because with more data floating around, it also means that there are more penetration points. And how do you solve a problem like that? And just open it up to the floor if there's anybody who wants to respond to that. Lian Jai or Anu?
Maybe I'll talk a little bit and then I'll hand it over to Anu.
Yeah,
because she definitely has the sort of like the data management side of things. Yeah, I think sort of I think from what I've been observing in the market, there are basically 3 ways to go about doing it. I think the main priority is to get your obviously data governance, data maintenance practices within your company straightened. You need to have a proper way of dealing with data, storing it, processing it, and then maybe at some point discarding them. Those has to be properly delineated, clarified, and then in some cases has to be made transparent to your client as well. Then the other 2 ways of doing it is either you encrypt your traffic either using a hardware method or using a software method. And obviously both has their pros and cons. Using hardware encryption obviously requires different security modules, TPM. And if you're using a software approach, there's a lot more stuff that goes into it, be it in your at your traffic or at your database level. So I think the challenge is that the threat will always be a step ahead. And then I think there is never a bulletproof way or future-proof way to mitigate all this. But I think the entire industry has been trying very, very hard to come up with at least a good framework to prevent large-scale data leaks. I'm not sure what opinion Anu has on this.
Yeah, Lian and Glenn, very important topic that you're raising here. So let me comment a couple of thoughts here. So I'm not a development or a product expert, but that's absolutely what they're dealing with day to day, whether it's IoT or it's any of our application solutions at SAP. Security is the top priority. And I recently read a read a report by PwC, which also showed that cybersecurity is one of the top concerns, if not the top one, for CEOs or C-level executives. So the topic is of absolute essence. Now, we as SAP, or at least in my area, one of the things that we take advantage of is, again, partnerships in this area. So in SAP, we're engaging with our partners, and we're forming alliances, which help us to discuss with experts and other industry players how to make our solutions more robust, how to adhere to certain standards. And that is absolutely key in the world of industrial IoT, so that these things can talk to each other, so that there is effective communication. But we also, in such groups, form discussions around data security and cybersecurity. So, and we'd be happy to discuss more and kind of share more for your background on that if you're interested. So that's an absolutely important priority for SAP as well.
Thank you for that. Zach, any thoughts on your end, with your 2 million square feet worth of IoT devices, how has the building management side of things taken to this from a security standpoint?
Yeah, just a little bit of anecdotal, feedback on that. We've worked with quasi-government entities, starting with the three letters JTC. We've worked with NUS. We've worked with some large multinationals, and a big part of the due diligence and each device. So let me kind of frame the discussion and then make a point. So each application has its own unique set of security constraints, and the due diligence. So you'd make it all the way through, kind of work your way down through the food chain, and then you'd basically be very near approval, maybe even doing a proof of concept for free and blah, blah, blah. And then the security people would come in and just destroy your project, out of fear. So you'd spend 2 months in addition, working with the security people to ensure that you had the appropriate firewalls at the appropriate stages, and really at every step of the way, your field device, your gateway collector, back at the wherever your server is hosted, whether that server communicates with the cloud, there's different layers of security that have to be put at the appropriate place on different stages along that way. My point is, there's not a unified way of approaching this the same way, that like a harmonized approach. So, maybe some have proprietary security, some have standards-based security, some have security that matches an existing industry standard that is, sort of attached with a legacy company. So it's sort of like a petting zoo approach to security. You've got a giraffe, you've got a gerbil, you've got a dog, you've got a hamster, you've got a porcupine, and you have to find a way to get them all to work together. And then the risk profile, or the maturity of the people assessing risk in each company, is also wildly variable. That's another petting zoo. So you've got a petting zoo of devices and security protocols, and then you have a petting zoo of the needs and maturity levels of your customer, and you have to kind of mix that all up and make it work. So just again, from a practical standpoint, I would say, if you're going into a practical application and you're trying to deploy, a system into a company, I would engage as early as humanly possible with those security people, because the long pole in the tent on a critical path schedule to deploy could be your security due diligence. So it's better to figure out if you have a fatal flaw in that early rather than later.
Okay, thanks for that. And for all those who say, hey, look, where do I start from here? If there's one thing to leave with you, it's get the security guys, especially those in the cybersecurity space, up front early in your design, rather than at the tail end of the equation. And I think Anu did allude to that look, we actually partner with experts because they know their space best, and we come together where each bring the value proposition to the table, right? So I think if that's one key action item, I think that helps to make it easy for you, for those who are not technically, comfortable in the space of cybersecurity. Now, Anu, I wanted to ask you this question around the level of adoption with respect to what you've seen, for example, with you being based in Europe, and if you do have any examples of what happens in our part of the world in Asia, how does that differ in terms of adoption and maturity and so on and so forth? Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you're segmenting these markets, like you mentioned, the right word is to actually segment them more by maturity and adoption rather than by region. So within the APJ market, we see some markets which are of a similar maturity, if not driving even higher industrial IoT adoption than some of what you would traditionally call the established or the established or mature markets of the world. So we see a very high adoption also in the APJ region of industrial IoT and our industrial IoT embedded solutions across the board. So SAP has solutions or applications where we've embedded IoT functionality. It's part of the product, it's part of the application. So you can, for example, take the data from IoT and improve your R&D process. You can run simulations on that IoT data. You can develop better products. We call that the space of intelligent products, or the space of designing products, so the design process steps. Similarly, in the area of manufacturing, we've got products that already include IoT, such that you can make analysis of how your production performance or how the quality of your output may be by also gauging some of those IoT, some of the data that the sensors are giving you about that particular work center, as an example. Similarly in logistics, so in the what we call the deliver part, or the intelligent logistics, factory and logistics piece, we have IoT-based solutions that can help customers to automate their warehouses, automate their transportations. And we see these particular examples, this particular adoption also in APJ. In fact, that's something that we've just recently discussed with one of our partners who had a very interesting pilot project that they conducted with a customer in APJ around this. So we see an equivalent adoption of these topics. And lastly, also another key area of the industrial IoT applications is condition monitoring or predictive maintenance. And there too, we see a significant adoption in our APJ market. So I would say that it's really up to individual, countries and market units, but also it's very much an attitude of the individual business where they want to take that innovation. But we see a high adoption and interest in APJ as well, certainly.
Okay, now my question then is, do you see those adopting in APJ primarily being multinationals, and you could be an American MNC, a European MNC, but they've got operations in APJ, or are you seeing it more in terms of the local giants within the market? What do you typically?
It's both. So it is the big MNCs coming out of the Asian market, but it is also the smaller and the more nimble players that are adopting IoT, whether it's around their air purifiers, or it is products where we haven't seen a very high adoption, or where you would expect that, okay, it's going to be largely these large industrial players that are going to be adopting these the industrial IoT-based solutions. But that's not necessarily the case. There is actually a very nice mix across the board in the size of the enterprise that is adopting industrial IoT-based solutions.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to switch a little bit to moving a bit into the future and emerging trends. And Lian Jia, question is for you. This whole big new word called Metaverse sounds very, the latest buzzword that's been going around. How does the Metaverse and this IoT ecosystem fit together, or is one a subset of the other? How do you see that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I guess it really depends on the type of use cases that you're trying to address with Metaverse. Essentially, in its core, Metaverse is almost like an extension of what we today the market known as mixed reality. So basically, it's about how you bring that VR and AR capability and make it more immersive. It's essentially, you have a much better contextual experience and understanding of your surrounding within a virtual compound. And there are obviously tons of applications that can be enabled using Metaverse. It can be gaming, it can be social media, it can be productivity, it can be other enterprise experience, and even businesses as well, like let's say cafe or sort of board games and all those kind of stuff. And I think the interesting part with Metaverse is that, first of all, it's a very new concept. So there has to be an ecosystem play here, that you do need a lot of partners to enable it, because what goes into building a metaverse can be a lot of stuff. You need the right hardware, obviously, either a VR or AR headset, or it has to be the proper computing servers, but it also means that you do need other forms of complementary services, so cybersecurity, payments, other productivity types of software, and also sort of social network platforms, and also sort of communication software. And then within that, there will be a lot of usage of AI and also connected devices, and that's where those sorts of like the current partnership that's sort of being building within the IoT space will actually translate very well into the metaverse world. But then the question is who's going to lead that? I think there's a lot of discussion around whether you're having it becoming like a centralized framework or a distributed framework. Who's going to lead, let's say, if it's a centralized framework, or also if it's a distributed framework, how they're going to distribute it across all the different processing nodes and the different connectivity nodes across the value chain. I think those are the questions that the industry needs to resolve before they can talk about or launch a metaverse product. But the future is almost here. We can almost taste it, if you ask me.
Okay, no, thanks for that. And I know I'm sensitive that we are down to 3 minutes. And so I ask each and every one of you, if there is one thing you want to leave with the audience in terms of, okay, great, I listened to all this, I'm excited. What's my first step forward? What do I do first? If you could give us some of your thoughts around that. So Zach, I'll start off with you.
Yeah, and again, this is not a very provocative or answer, but I think clearly define what is the most important thing to your business, and what would it mean to have incremental or perhaps even medium or even profound change in the efficiencies of that most important thing. So, if your WIP is 2.5 days for a large capital piece of equipment, and you can trim that down to 2.25 days, and you can pump more revenue, out of your factory, that's a profound difference. So define that thing that is start with the things that are most important, and define it clearly, understand the metrics financially and what that means to increase efficiency in those areas, and then apply the appropriate IoT layer for that. And then I think you become an evangelist when that works out.
Okay, thanks. Anu, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Two thoughts. On the one hand, I would recommend to always look at, it's not just important to get that IoT data, but it is important to make business sense out of that data. And you can do that when you don't have to go into high-risk implementations or costly implementations of building up the integration with your backend, with the enterprise applications. So make sure to evaluate that as well in your decision process. And point number two I would recommend is, as you're getting started with industrial IoT transformations or IoT projects, they're very often not on time, and they're very often not on schedule. According to an MPI study that I recently read, 1/3 of them are actually not. So it's important that you also evaluate the chance, where can you do smaller jumpstart steps? So we, for example, are working with our partners such as HCL and Zebra and CloudRail, and we're really building up these turnkey offerings and rapid POCs for customers to realize Industry 4.0 or industrial IoT transformations in smaller steps, but just in a matter of a very short span of time to get quick time to value. So that would be my key thoughts.
Thank you. Lian Jai, take us home.
Yeah, so I think there is one thing that I've learned from the industry, also speaking on behalf of all the end user here, including Keith and Jack, is that the industry has enough technology. I think we have a lot of the technologies are actually quite mature. But what we don't have sometimes is proper solutions, or even solutions that, even just simple solutions that can be implemented and adopted by end users. I think a lot of times we delve too much on how huge the potential of a technology can be, but ignore the fact that as what a lot of the panelists here today shared, that there's a lot of challenges that comes with deploying those technologies. So sometimes having a simple solution works best and serve the client very, very well. So I think that's probably the key takeaway.
Okay, thank you very much. And so for the audience, we thank you for your time. Again, remember, start off with your business problem. From there, if IoT is part of that solution, use it, but make sure you are able to make sense of the data, right? It might not have to be a huge transformation. Do it in baby steps. Anu calls it small jump start steps. And sometimes solutions don't have to be complicated. They can be simple. So we leave this with you. We thank you for your time. And again, panelists, appreciate your sharing. Have a nice week or what's left of the week. Yeah, take care.